Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first step in VTE's Writing Support Lab. My name is Alex Sinclair. I'll be facilitating this informal conversation about tools that can help people in this case, give feedback, assessment, and grades on student writing. But we'll cover other topics as well because we want to look at diverse things that people can use. So this is the landing page for the lab, and you have some information about this. And I wanted to show it to you so you can know about this, and I'll go back to the other screen. This is the landing page for this step with a list of guests, and I did a computation of links that is also present in the collaborative document. I posted it in the chat so you can have access to it. It's also available on Diigo with some themes that we might cover, including about literacy itself, questioning it possibly, feedback, assessment, grading, testing, and things like that. Some challenges that will be part of the second step of the lab, mostly challenges to writing. In the second step, we'll talk about that. But also digital humanities and some assistance that we can get to language learning. So maybe, James, you could start?
Okay, good morning everyone. James Bennett here from Udokun Plagiarism Detection Systems. Although, as has been stated, I'm not here to sell anything. I'm here to participate from a pedagogical standpoint. There you go. Thank you.
Thank you. Jamie?
Hi, good morning everyone. Jamie Bridge from Cegep du Vieux-Montréal now, and I'm a teacher there teaching English as a second language.
Excellent. Thank you. Stefan?
Good morning, everyone.
Hello.
Stefan Sinclair from Miguel, and I'm most active in digital humanities.
Thank you. Kevin?
Hi, this is Kevin Linton. I'm a physics teacher at Vanier College. I'm particularly interested in how we can use writing support for STEM applications. Like, for instance, for lab reports, things where perhaps the teacher doesn't necessarily feel fully qualified to evaluate writing, and what tools are there that can support like science teachers in that role.
Excellent. And in fact, it was part of the concept for the lab that since all teachers need to grade the language of instruction, it might be important to for STEM teachers to think about language, which is not necessarily the case usually, right? Next up, Norm?
This is Norm Stats. Most of you know me through my my ProfWeb identity, where I was sort of the journalist who covered a lot of scientific developments in the Quebec College Network before my welcome retirement a few weeks ago. However, I did have another identity, which Jamie Bridge knows. We were teachers together, PSL at Cegep de Vieux-Montréal. And as such, I always tried, it's a terrible admission, to use my students as guinea pigs, trying out a lot of the technology that I reported on. And I have a number of pet technologies that I've used, one which I'll talk about is Markin, and the other is a platform that I've been working on now called News Active. And I think that one of the things we're going to discover is the difference between correcting, I should say, second language writing, or correcting writing for grammar, or correcting writing for structure, and correcting writing for content. And I think that's certainly something that we're discovering at News Active, which is that those are two completely different activities. And technology that's going to allow you to do one effectively may not necessarily do the other nearly as well.
Absolutely, yeah, that's a very good point. And in fact, I want to talk about feedback, assessment, and all of that together in different ways. Eva?
I'm Eva Dobler from Teaching and Learning Services McGill. And I'm simply here because I'm interested in writing in the disciplines and anything that relates to it.
Excellent, thank you very much. So maybe the first question I would like to ask, and maybe Norm can talk about it, especially if you keep, as somebody at John Abbott said, if you can keep the mic a little bit close to your mouth, about why we provide feedback.
Why do we provide feedback for students? And I think that's one of the critical things that we're running into in using electronics. The easiest answer to that question is it varies. What are you trying to accomplish in your class? What are you trying to teach? What is the goal of your writing assignment? We are unusual, I think, in Quebec because of our second language status when we write English, in that often, even if we're not in an ESL class, we are providing feedback to second language writers. And in many cases, that means that although we are looking to accomplish the goals of the class, which are perhaps not that involved in effectively writing, although scientific writing is not something to be ignored. The craft of scientific writing certainly, and I just saw the comment from John Abbott College. I'm trying, all these names are going in my mind, but we did a report on I believe it was a biology teacher who focused most of her class on patterning correct writing for students. And yet, what we're actually looking to do in many cases is as well give students support for the basics of of English language. You made a mistake, and how do we structure that mistake in a way that the student is going to benefit? It's one thing to simply say, "No, you schmuck, you use are." You know, you could say something like, "There is no activities this week." Idiot, you used are. You should have used are. Or what we can say to the student is not correct the student, but give the student a hint, and simply say to the student, "How do we hint?" And say, "Oops, that word is wrong, and it's wrong. Think about the agreement between subject and verb. Is your verb singular? Is your verb plural? Why did you write it?" And so we, in many cases, have giving the student a hint, making the student reflect on the words that they use, and modeling for a student, modeling correct stylistic input. And then we come completely into the other thing of, okay, you've written this, you're actually, what's your thinking? What's your content? Forget all the singular, plural, whatever. Your content is either very effective, which is something good for the student to know, or not. You weren't thinking.
Absolutely, thank you. I think part of the issue is about what is appropriate feedback there, because I linked to some of Nick Walker's material that he provided us, including a video when he explains corrective feedback and both the concept and his system itself. And it's quite interesting that in some cases it can be very inappropriate as feedback. So providing feedback by voice is actually one of the ways that we can look at. I think it's pretty interesting to do so. Voice and face, when you can have expressions like that, it can actually help quite a bit. That's quite interesting. And since we have two people from the National Writing Project, do you notice, either Linda or Eva, if you notice anything in terms of what can help as providing feedback in writing, like as people learn to write more properly.
What we have, I mean, we've talked a lot to different writing instructors, and they actually, I know multiple people who give audio feedback as opposed to just writing something on a paper, and students really seem to appreciate that. It's somehow critique is less harsh, I think, when you actually hear the voice of your professor as opposed to just having red ink all over your paper. Another thing is that a lot of professors, I mean, it depends what you're grading for. At university level, we try to get professors to grade more the content and less the spelling and grammar.
Yeah.
And particularly in the disciplines, right? I mean, if the course is a content-based course and not an English or French language course, then the focus should be on the content. And so, for example, how was her name? Janet, can't remember her right now. But basically the thing is that when you're grading, that as you're reading the paper and as you're giving the feedback, you're really giving feedback as a reader and not as a grader.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So that your focus as an instructor as you're reading the paper is not the person who is looking for mistakes and who is looking for problems, but read it as you would read the paper of a peer.
Absolutely, yeah.
And then give feedback accordingly, and it changes the focus a little bit. It changes the emphasis.
Yeah, absolutely. Jamie, so you're talking about ScreencastOMatic, right? ScreencastOMatic. Would you like to talk a little bit? Did you try it in your grading?
Yes, it's something that I use on a number of levels. I use it before an evaluation just to model something. So if I want to sort of create an essay before students' eyes just as a model to go by, I can use a screencast of that. So it's basically a video of everything that's happening on my screen. It doesn't have to be my face. They can be the students can see, say, my Microsoft Word document almost live in a way as I'm narrating what I'm doing. And something that I've tried over a few semesters for a variety of evaluations is to use ScreencastOMatic when I'm actually evaluating their essays, so they can really see me moving through their document, grading it step by step, and I can explain in a very personalized fashion why they're being graded as they are, and it also allows me to provide personal comments that I don't necessarily have to type as well, which is sort of an added benefit. And finally, it gives that personal contact with the students, almost like they've come to you for a consultation in a way, and you're providing that personalized contact to the student, which I think they appreciate.
I just wanted to mention, it just seemed to be an interesting sort of follow-up. I've been trying lately to give feedback auditorily in an audio clip, and through at McGill per se, I'm able to, in my course's LMS, actually give an audio clip feedback so that the person can actually listen to it and doesn't have to read the feedback. So that could be beneficial for certain types of learners, as well as I find when giving feedback, it's really important to really like try to picture, okay, where is this student coming from and what they've written, and almost scaffold the responses, like your feedback, to support them to learn. You could say from their mistakes or what they've written, and not that it's a mistake, but that it's an opportunity for them to progress. And so it remains in a very sort of positive format and vein, and then even lead them to finding other resources that would support them to progress further?
Sure. So, I would say as a preamble that the tools that we've been developing for online grammar checking are very narrowly focused in some ways on grammatical issues and not meaning. And were first developed with the idea that language learning is difficult enough already, and both for the students and the teachers, and that it seemed to us that there weren't enough when we started, almost 15 years ago, that there weren't tools that seemed to do the mechanical things or seem to be able. There are a certain number of errors that second language learners make that should be fairly easy for computers to catch, and if the computer is able to do that in an interactive way, and our tools are very much oriented around having students receive feedback and explanations rather than things like autocorrect. So they read a text, they submit it. It's not that the flow of their writing is interrupted by the correction mechanism as they're writing. They come back, they try and understand their errors. There are hopefully fairly accessible explanations about the kinds of problems there are. Because some of the tools that are available assume native speaker familiarity with linguistic concepts, and that's not always the case. But the main idea is that the correction can happen by the student for some things, which then allows both the student and the teacher to focus on either more semantic or argument structure type things, or even some more advanced linguistic issues that current technology isn't able to address.
When it comes to Urukund, we're only a plagiarism detection. That is a text that has been written, sent through our systems, and it is then checked and compared against what we previously received and then what is out there on the internet and in various academic databases. When it comes to feedback, I'm afraid that Urukund is often used not as a feedback tool itself, but as something that teachers use to help base their feedback upon. Revisely is, nothing to Revisely. This is not a sales pitch at all. Revisely is a very, very new company. They're based in Utrecht in the Netherlands. I had the pleasure of meeting them recently. They provide, it's online, obviously, and students put their text in there, in this system. And what it does for the teacher is that it automatically, not corrects, but marks, in a sense of it underlines grammatical errors and writes and has a speech, some sort of bubble, which explains what is wrong with it. And then this allows the teacher to skip the spending time correcting errors that can be done by computers, such as grammatical errors and spelling errors, to then be able to put in feedback directly in the paper and say about content rather than grammar and basic language errors. It's in a bit of a developmental stage, I must say. It's very much based around Dutch, but they are spreading out to other languages, and they have an English version that's mainly ish ready, and they will expand to other languages later. But as a tool, I see it as, I wish I had it when I was teaching, basically. But like I said, I'm not on commission from them or anything. For the record, I used to be an English as a second language teacher in an international school here in Sweden. Thank you.
So we've worked with different schools, different teachers, and tried different approaches. And one is to have the teachers ask for the text in advance of putting it through one of our tools. Another is because in that case there's a better chance of seeing the kinds of changes that are being made. We've also tried to tweak in some cases. It can be very overwhelming for students to get corrected text back and to see a lot of things that they need to address. So we've worked a bit on some of the possibilities for either focusing on certain grammatical issues or trying to prioritize so that it's not quite as overwhelming. The other aspect that we haven't really fully explored, we've done a bit but not a lot, is to try and study how students start to correct what they try, what they focus on if it's not a more guided approach. And what I would say there simply is that we have lots of data about how, because students resubmit their text as they're correcting it, we have lots of data. We just haven't had the time and resources to look at it more closely. But I'd love to.
Gabe Flax of News Activist has found that by submitting, asking his students to submit their papers, the text that they wrote on News Activist, which is effectively a blog, he then asks them to submit the text to turn it in, which gives them feedback, but also by the structure of a lot of these correctors, allows him to receive a duplicate copy of the text, which allows him to have a private line of correction to the student. Because so often what we're doing are these blog platforms which allow people to write, but they're totally public. And the student may have issues of not looking to receive content that can be read worldwide on their points. And that is an issue to think of, how private you are. And in that vein, I wanted to sort of talk about the privacy issue, because something I did is completely unprivate, but it was a lot of fun. What I did is I took blog posts from my students and I said, they're public, they're blog posts, they're already out there. And then what I did is I took the text and put it into I am plugging it, a CCDMD product called NetQuiz, which creates online quizzes. I turned the student's text into a close exercise, a sort of, fill in the word where they had made mistakes, and would create a quiz where there were about 10 situations where there was an error. And I wouldn't say that the students had made an error. I would simply provide four or five options of distractor for someone to choose. And then I would take the net quiz and send it to everyone in the class. So it was each student in the class got one of their texts to be the object of these tests, which the entire class had to go through the same process of choice that student had made. And then in the class, I asked the student who had done the original writing to explain their reasoning for what they chose for these 10, shall we say, errors that they had created in the class. So they were able to discuss it and discuss the rules without me presenting it as a class. So it was a very public event, but I think what it did is it broached grammar in an almost conversational way, which I think allowed the students to perhaps incorporate it more easily, and in a class where there was a lot of variety of skills, allowed me to target the skill level of the students in particular.
What we have noticed here at Udekund is that there's been a far more urgent focus on privacy, data privacy, and personal information, on that kind of sort. We've noticed that a lot of people are asking us where our servers are based, simply because a lot of the texts that are submitted through our servers, through our systems for checking by students, are done not openly. It's not something that's posted on a blog. It's something that is uploaded to a learning management system or a virtual learning environment like Blackboard or Moodle. That is, it's open in the sense that it can be read by people who are within the group, but it's closed in the sense that you cannot Google it. So we find that a lot of people are asking us where our servers are. Because we're a European company and we are fully based in Europe, all the information that we receive remains within Europe and on European-owned servers. This is something that we're very proud of course, but also it's been very, very useful because a lot of people are very uncomfortable with the idea of student information and student texts being out there on less secure servers or those that are knowingly open to various governmental agencies. This is partly because of the point that was raised earlier on of students being unhappy with the idea that their texts will be seen later on in 5 or 6 years when they may no longer be overly willing to stand behind what they have written, or pretty much have their name on a bit of paper that has been written in a somewhat less developed way that they could do now. This is something that comes up frequently, and it comes up in all the tender processes that we receive these days. I completely understand. I feel that as a student, a former student, I look through my own master's thesis and I'm not ashamed of it or anything. I wouldn't want to publish it out there. But I feel myself that I have developed as a person significantly in the 5-6 years it's been since I submitted this thesis. A lot of my students when I was teaching, they were ashamed of what they'd written 6 months ago, let alone 5 years, due to the development of their English or development of their writing skills. Posting things online is something that people haven't considered before now, but it's very much coming to the fore in these discussions.
Sure. So yeah, so this is a completely different project, and I think it's worth here emphasizing that Voyant Tools is really conceived of as a general purpose text analysis and reading environment. But it turns out that we run workshops on it, and we teach teachers how to teach it, and one of the exercises that we do fairly frequently, or one of the things that we suggest that some instructors do, is to have students upload an essay that they've written. Typically this is more with post-secondary students, but have an essay that they've written and upload it to see how it works. So you're probably familiar with things like word clouds that show high frequency terms, and if you've written the text, probably there's nothing surprising that will come of that. But some of the more fine-grained tools that there are allow you to maybe realize some of the it could be either tics that you have when you're writing, that you repeat a word that you didn't realize you repeated a lot, or and this happens when we're assessing writing as well. We say this is repetitive, or how certain arguments are structured. Certain phrases might be overused. You can quickly, as an example, if a particular instructor this is a bit of a contrived example, but is especially interested in avoiding students starting sentences with and, for instance, and this is a tool. You could do it really with searching in a word processor, but this is a tool that's oriented toward very quickly being able to isolate the use of certain words and scroll down and see, are there any ands that start a sentence, for instance. So it feels a bit more like a contrived example because typically we use it for literary criticism and analysis, but there have been but I know people do use it to get a better sense, as Alex was saying, of their own writing. And again, this happens to be a tool that's free and online.
Well, I've been experimenting recently just because of some of the things that the ministry is asking us to do, such as getting students to focus on editing their text. What I've been doing during the midterm is I have been indicating that an error has been made, and then at the very bottom of the text I might indicate in more detail perhaps their top 3 errors, but I'm stopping there. So really what the student's text looks like is their original text with a bunch of circles around potential errors, and I'm returning it to them and asking them to go back and review their work that they submitted. They're graded on it. And then later on, as part of their speaking evaluation, they have to come back to me with the correction for these errors. So in the case of things like repetitive words, hopefully that would come to the surface. The student would see the word "and" at the beginning of 8 sentences circled and come to the realization sort of holy cow, I really do write "and" that many times in my text. And it's the student sort of coming along and realizing that themselves, that hopefully cements the behavior in such a way that they correct that in the future.
The value of appropriate writing, I think, unlike, again, I have an ESL orientation, and I have to admit that being in on this session has been really fascinating for me to see other people's orientations, and because we're so focused on structure. And what I do find is that the value of appropriate writing, although we are discussing issues of privacy and the student's ability, I do believe that one of the most important ways that we can allow students to understand the value of their writing is to put them in situations where they are getting public exposure. News Activist is one with a blog where people can come in, and there is nothing that is more appropriate than getting a response from someone else to a post that you've made, which in many ways will indicate the strengths and weaknesses of what you've created. And not only, I can think of numerous examples that we've used electronically where we're actually putting students on the front lines and saying, someone is reacting to your writing. And I almost use the word judge, but that's a little too hard. There's another project. I saw a student, and I believe it was a science student, so this was in French, who forced his students to use Wikipedia. They all had to interact with Wikipedia as posters and see how long the article could stay up without having someone else actually come in and make changes and be in a wiki and edit it. And so many electronic tools can be used to allow a judgment to be made. The wiki, even within a class, talking about scientific writing, there was a teacher at Vanyang who had her students create wikis about mathematical principles and had other students comment and evolve that text into a text that could go public. Because I think the whole blog principle is a key for people to get appropriate comments, not only from the teacher. Because I think that what happens is that the teacher has a particular goal, but what is interesting for the students is to realize that by going to a wider public, you are getting very different styles of feedback. And I think that if the student is open to this correction, that is a valuable instructional strategy.
I totally agree with Norm, because I think one of the big problems with writing in schools or in university is that our sole audience is the instructor, and that is incredibly artificial for a writing situation. So if we can come up with alternative audiences, I think that's a big plus. And the other point that I want to make is that when we ask what is good writing, well, that's very context specific, right? I mean, a blog is not the same as a research paper. An email is not the same as a proposal for a grant or something. And I think that's also something we really need to make students aware of, that when you sit down to write something, you ask yourself, what is this writing for? What's the purpose of my writing? What's the audience of my writing? And that kind of decides on what is good writing in this context. So I don't think you can just say this is good, like a certain kind of writing is good writing.
Yes, earlier we were just talking about privacy and the World Wide Web at large, and publishing works out there for everybody to see at a time when we're still, especially in a second language, developing that language. One thing that I find that works really well is sort of a compromise of the two situations, where the learning environment is closed, where students are publishing works that other people other than the teacher are going to see, in other words, one's peers, but at the same time they know that it's not going to be going out onto the World Wide Web. And I've found that there is a huge improvement in the initial text that gets shunted out to that closed environment than if it's just sent to the teacher. I think the students sort of have this impression that, oh well, my copy is going to the teacher and they're just going to correct me anyways, any mistakes that I make. And when they know that it's going to be read by their peers, there's a tendency to take a second run at doing the editing process.
Well, I just wanted to say, yes, the whole idea of purpose, I just wanted to get in a very quick note. It's a very apt comment, and although he's not here today, it would have been really fun if you want to hear a rant, if academics ever rant, which they never do. Nick Walker can go on and on and on, and certainly in ESL we are absolutely riveted to the notion of the persuasive essay, to the point of excluding almost all other forms of writing. And he really did an excellent presentation, I think 2 years ago at Rascals, on how the persuasive essay is not necessarily the most effective way to allow the student to present the information that they have to present. They're not necessarily formulating an argument. And I do think that certainly in ESL, and other people might come in on this, we are getting out of the lockstep that we had of forcing students to write, shall we say, classical papers, particularly the persuasive essay, without inviting them to create in situations where they're far more likely to find themselves once they leave school.
About a project that I've been involved in that's, I think, very appropriate to this and very exciting. It's called Daylight, and basically it's about getting students to write rationales about a physics concept or a particular concept problem. And then it's an online process where they get to see the rationales of other students and then re-answer the concept question. And what's particularly fascinating is the students can vote on which rationales they find the most convincing. So the question is, what makes for good writing? Ultimately, good writing is good communication. And we've found that like some students are particularly good communicators, and they're able to convince their peers of the correct answer. And what we've noticed is this changes over the course of the semester. So the more students write about physics, about the language of physics, the better they actually get at answering the concept questions. So this is something we're pursuing. Like, we're looking at the content, of course, but going back to something that was mentioned earlier about the word frequency, there are also correlations there we find. And not only the word frequency, but the way the words are put together, the n-grams, seems to be important as well.
So a lot of the tools that we use with teachers actually aren't yet online, although there are certainly some people who use a wide range of online tools. One of the things that we found really useful in working with teachers is working with rubrics that really lay out language for teachers to think about the qualities of writing and tap into some of these ideas of purpose and audience so that teachers can break down what's happening with the content of the argument. What about the tone and style that young people are using, and is it appropriate if they're writing for an audience of peers, if they're writing for an adult audience, if they're writing for a public audience. Something else that I think builds on some of the content ideas is we are working in a number of partnerships with other organizations. One of the really interesting ones is with a public television station where students take up current content and they write short tweets or sometimes blog posts about the content that are publicly available. So it does raise some of those privacy issues. It also allows them to interact with their peers largely around the US, around content issues, and has some of these, really helps students focus in on their content, and students start asking each other, well, did you consider this evidence? Have you looked at this? And so their content really gets challenged.
By all means, thank you, Alex. We find that the privacy issues, they seem to be, it's not just the student's name, it's the way of tracing what has been written to the person who wrote it when it is not, when that wasn't the express intention of the writer. We have found that even with anonymous submissions, that we can handle anonymous submissions and we keep their anonymity from the student and the person marking them. This is all very fair and well, but if it is then possible to work out who sent the original document, then these privacy things have, well, any anonymous marking becomes very much unanonymous after a while when you can work out who this is. And that's the thing that we are approached about mainly when it with privacy, is that, you know, how can we be certain that the information we have cannot be used to locate people and can be used to track people down? We're talking about email addresses, student names. If you know, it's not just the person who wrote it, but also the list of names, people in the class, their IP addresses, and any other way of identifying them. We, as a company, we don't see always email addresses as being private information. I mean, I have my own one, and I am blessed to be a child of the late 70s, grew up in the UK, and my name is James, and I shared my first name with about 25% of every male I know. I also have a very common surname, so my name itself is not really private information, but my email address is based around that, so that is neither interesting, but at the same time I wouldn't want that to be leaked out somewhere. These are the privacy things that we see as a company, and we try and make sure that these are kept private and kept secret and never shared with people.
We have a really interesting. We had a really interesting session a few weeks ago regarding privacy, and it was let's say a shock for on the pedagogical side. Because we spoke about Google Apps for Education, we spoke about Office 365, as well as compliance, and usually it's not related stuff for the pedagogical guys. So it was really interesting, and you are all invited to join the laboratory in French regarding cloud computing.
Last year I was doing an experimental course using English in business, and we used Google Docs almost exclusively. I was working in partnership with Lisa Deguire in Collège Jean-Pierre, which was a lot of fun. And we created cross-college teams of students. But I think if you play your controls on Google Docs correctly, you can avoid those privacy issues. What we were doing was we were running the groups and only allowing in the students that were the members of the groups, so that we hope, we did avoid the privacy issues with Google Documents. And I do have to admit, in terms of its function, it works really well. It's quick, it's cheap, and it's really dependable. I mean, when all else fails, and I'm looking at this conference where we are experiencing technical problems, and in a class, you could lose your class. And the real advantage, again, to always have a plan B, is that Google Docs is an absolute ironclad plan B. If you have a project going with Google Docs, you can get your students onto that project if there is a technical problem. It remains the sort of touchstone of dependability. It really never fails.
Yes, I'd like to go back to what I believe Eva said about thinking about the audience when you write. This is, as I said, the last chance to say these things. I must underline this as a point. I think one of the greatest things that any teacher has ever said to me, ever, was that you must consider, to whom you're writing. If you write your essay to me, then that's very, very friendly. But you should write your essay for a reader who understands the subject but is not an expert. And this, when I wrote my literary theory and literary analysis and so on and so forth, was the single greatest thing that anyone has ever taught me. So I think that if we tell our students, as I told my students back when I was teaching, that you must consider to whom you're writing and why, then I feel that this is key to improving the quality of writing, and thus, as a feedback comment, is the single best thing I've ever received.
Well, I thought it was very interesting today. For me, it's very interesting to hear about things like antidote or spell check and things like that, because that's really not something I usually think about. And I hope that in the webinars to come, we will get to talk more about those issues. And yeah, I mean, for me, I find it very interesting how big the emphasis is still on grammar and spelling. Not because I don't think it's important. I do absolutely think it's important. I mean, you can't read something that's really badly written. But I also think that when we're teaching content courses, it's so much about the intellectual development of our students. And I still think that we should put more emphasis on that part and on the fact that writing develops thinking and helps us to learn things and reflect on things. And I just think that aspect of writing gets too much into the background, and I would like to emphasize that more in the future.
Sorry, there you go. I'm not quite sure I really should make my comment about grading language. It's been, I must confess, I've not been a teacher for the last 18 months, 2 years. But what I can gladly say is that I feel that I agree that grammar and spelling is of significant importance, but also it is the content. And I think that by giving grading language and feedback to focus mainly on content with mentions of grammar and spelling is helpful. But I do find that grammar and spelling, with grammar checks built into the majority of word processing programs, that the grammar checks and spelling are becoming not just less important, but they're actually less relevant to the discussion, simply because the autocorrect takes care of these things. I don't like it myself. I don't agree with it. I don't like Microsoft's idea of English grammar either. But I cannot ignore the fact that most students' work, the last couple of years of my teaching, was significantly better spelling grammar than before.
Sure, just I don't really have too much to say other than I appreciate us having opportunities like this to have a dialogue around some of the issues that we're faced with. As an ESL teacher, something that I run into is this interesting terrain that we have, where every professor is really sort of in charge of the course content for their courses, and so every single professor is using different sorts of tools and must go out on their own and find them, and that makes for a difficult terrain to be in, because there's not a lot of tools that are always 100% on the mark. In other words, they don't always fulfill objectives, and we run into this interesting situation where there's no budget. A lot of these tools are asking the teacher to fork over cash out of their own pocket, or try to encourage their college to hand over cash, which really just isn't going to happen. But on the other end, the free products sometimes leave something to be desired. So whenever we have a forum like this to discuss exactly what's out there, what's good, what works, I find that these are very instructive opportunities.
So I want to go back to something cycle back to things that we said early in the conversation around the importance of voice and hearing the teacher's voice in feedback. And I thought that this whole conversation was very interesting in contextualizing response and feedback on content, and then how you situate some of the focus on grammar and spelling and those kinds of conventions issues, and how content and awareness of audience seem to be the most important things. And at the same time, the grammar and spelling tools can be really useful to help young people really be able to reach their audiences.
Okay, so all I wanted to do is build on the point that Jamie Bridge made about using equipment, and that in many cases, an event such as the one that we're having now, a webinar, dare I mention it, ProfWeb, are forums, places of exchange of information for teachers that I think as teachers we have to become more aware of. That we are, we see these forums, communities of practice, perhaps as catalogs, and that we don't really appreciate the importance of them as places where we can really exchange not just the occasional tidbit of good information, to sort of titillate our teaching, but where we can really hunker down, discuss problems that we're experiencing, and get the benefits of more people than just ourselves dealing with them.